welcome everyone. I'm very happy. We're very glad to host this new webinar in the EOF series, so the Economy of Francesco series. Today we will be talking about universal basic income. So we are adding a new topic, if you want, into our research, into our debate about potential economic policies that may be useful to foster a new idea of economics. Just to as a simple, let's say, a disclaimer that I need to do before starting. We, as Economy of Francesco, are very open to new ideas, to new debates, and as you can see, we host also different people, different views, and we are really curious and eager to foster these debates. However, we do not advocate specifically, okay, necessarily these ideas, in the sense that we're not here to present a kind of, promotion of any kind of these ideas. We would like to try together to reason about these ideas and to be open to new ideas, new hypotheses about how to improve our well-being in our societies. So how this webinar fits in the broader picture of the Economy of Francesco, and especially of the work we have been doing in these months in the working care villages. So we have been working quite a lot, I would say, about working care in the sense of trying to improve the way people live their own working activities. They can share their talents and skills in their own society. We have hosted Professor Nedelsky that is here today, and we are very glad to have her again, to share the view of a part-time for all economic policy proposal. So we are trying really to reason, on a very broad perspective on how our life could be improved in our especially developed society, but not necessarily only developed societies, making new ideas resonate and potentially being implemented by policymakers, entrepreneurs, and also common people. So today we add a new topic, a new idea, which is universal basic income, and we would like to understand. I'm very curious. I must admit, because I'm not an expert of this topic, so I admit it. I am an economist, but I never studied specifically universal basic income. So I'm really eager to see how this measure is expected to improve economic welfare, social welfare, and how this proposal can be affordable and I would say also incentive compatible in our economy, society, especially in the Western world. So having said that, really, I don't know, Georgia, if you want to add something.
I just wanted to mention, so as we were discussing before we started the recording, so as work and care as a village, we want to propose obviously how to have work and care resonate. And so one of our proposals, obviously, which we are trying to have our input as young people for the Economy of Francesco, is part-time for all. So one of the things that emerged from our last workshop was how to finance such a big change, such a norm change, and what might be needed. So what we're trying to discuss today is to see, if something like universal basic income could help support something like part-time for all, making welfare and in general better institutional and government positions, or if we have other financing options. So we have called other experts to see if we can find out something new and keep working on it towards our proposal for our event, which will be in October, by the way, this year. So stay tuned for more details. Anyway, this said, I want to have Michele Giannella start. So he can introduce himself if he wants, and he is our expert on UB and all the work that has been done, in this case in Europe. So we're going to start with Europe first. Take it away, Michele, when you're ready. You're muted, of course.
Yeah. Can you see and hear me? Okay. So thank you everyone for welcoming me. My name is Michele Gianella, and I represent for Italy the European Citizens Initiative, an institution of the European community, much like the Italian referendum, which aims at the introduction of a universal basic income in the continent. The road that leads me today here started like 7-8 years ago. I was a fond attendee of technology conferences, and in one of them I met a guy who had just written a book about the technological unemployment. That book blew me away, partly because part of the prophecy were already turning into reality. And so I started delving into the argument, and I looked on the internet for what solution could be found. And basic income, the basic income, universal basic income, although a crazy idea at the beginning, quickly looked like the most sensible one. So I tried to connect with the European community of the supporter of the idea, and I became quickly aware that there was in 2013 already another European Citizens Initiative, much like the current one. This initiative actually had a much more modest goal, because they just asked to the European Commission a feasibility study of the introduction of the measure, not the real not an implementation right away. Anyway, they gathered a significant number of supporters, but for a number of reasons, both cultural and technical, didn't succeed. Anyway, the European community of supporters, a kernel of this community, was already formed. We kept the relationship all along these 7 years. And during these 7 years, we witnessed before our eyes the sensibility, the sentiment of the world toward this idea changed completely. Especially in the last 3-4 last years, we have seen a stream of unexpected endorsement from successful entrepreneurs, chief economists, prominent political figures like the head of the UN, some head of states, and last but absolutely not least, last Easter we even witnessed the endorsement to the universal basic salary and later of the universal basic income from the Pope himself. This surge in enthusiasm over the years led us to ask to organize a second signature collection, a second European Citizens Initiative, whose collection started in 25th September last year. It was supposed to last 1 year until September 21, but given the notoriously extreme particular circumstances we are in, it has been postponed so far for 6 more months. So the signature collection will end, if nothing changes, on 25th March 2022. Now, let me go a little bit more into the detail. I will start the presentation. This is the official presentation that you should see. Can you see that? Okay. So what we are asking, basically, we are our goal is to collect. Our general goal is to collect 1 million signatures among all European citizens during the collection signature period. Anyway, the way you collect it, this 1 million signature, is not random. You have to respect some boundaries, let's say some diffusivity standards. You cannot connect like 1 million signature in Germany alone and get by. It has to be spread all across the country. All country has 2 milestones to look for. We have a quorum, which is a threshold of signature, which is a function of the number of members of European Parliament. To be more precise, is the number of maps 750 times, which for Italy is like 53,000 signatures. And then there is another milestone, which is the so-called goal, signature goal, which instead is a function of the demographic weight of this country in the European Union. And for Italy is like double. We should set our mind in Italy to collect like 100,000 signatures, which is 1/10 of the total, given that Italians are like roughly 1/10 of the total European population. Okay, but what we are asking for? Well, it might help to recall the definition coded by the Belgian philosopher Philippe van Parijs of what a universal basic income is, and especially what is not. According to van Parijs, we are talking about an income given, distributed by a political community, individually, not counting factors like the family quotient, the family ratio, unconditionally, without a means test, so no matter how you're rich and poor, and with no counterparty. So simply speaking, not asking for any kind of work in exchange. This signature collection basically can certainly join among other national initiatives that can be run in parallel, but this specifically is exquisitely at a continental level. If you look one detail, if you look at above, is a start unconditional basic incomes. The plural is not a detail because we will not to give the very same amount of money per month to all European citizens. Rather, we would like to have an amount that is different for each country, given that each country has a different price level, in order to mitigate in each and every country the social and economical inequalities one might find there. Now, this has every country has a national coordinators that other people can refer to. I am for Italy. The other coordinators in Italy is Sepp Kustacher, which used to be a member of the Green Party, and he was also the head of the European Citizens Initiative in 2013. So far, we have already witnessed some success. The first country who has reached the minimum threshold, the quorum, is Slovenia, and it's about 111% of signatures, and we hope that more countries, including of course ours, will join soon. There are now, as for Italy in particular, the signature collection has started at a very promising phase. This was also because of the help that I have received from BIN Italia, the Italian branch of the BIEN, the Basic Income Earth Networks, that today Andrea Fumagalli speaks on behalf too. They have made a very effective social media campaign. They have started spreading the news all over their established networks with months in advance, because this time we had the chance to we had like 6 months in advance to prepare the signature campaign, and this has caused a rush of signatures in the very first days and week when the collection started. The result of this, just to give you a benchmark, is that during the 2013 ECI, we have collected like 4,381 signatures, slightly less than 5,000 in 1 year. This time we reached that threshold in 22.5 days. So it's an absolute improvement that I'm happy to celebrate with you today. Along with this surge of enthusiasm, there is also a gloomy side, a dismal side, if you like, because the case for such an economic policy is growing more and more and more. The
You skipped for a second.
7 days ago, not only are evident today, but they are also accelerating. Just to throw a figure, a prominent sociologist a few days ago announced on a webinar that a perfect storm is brewing in Italy in particular, that in the worst case scenario might lead to something like 15 million poors. With such a dramatic case and with such a surge of enthusiasm, you can easily understand that if even if only a tiny percentage of the direct beneficiaries of this initiative could be reached by this news, the signature collection would end in 1 hour, possibly less. Instead, we are currently having some struggles. And the reason there are not a single reason. There are mainly three, in my opinion. The first obstacle we are facing now is the so-called adverse selection. Is what I call adverse selection. Think of all the millions of poor elderly people that would directly benefit from a measure like this. They do not find a place to sign on paper in the squares because squares are empty because of the pandemics, and they are not familiar with the technology and the technological channels like the social media, and so they are not reached by the news. A second problem is by the cultural resistance. It might seem, if you will, ironic, but in a country with so many unemployment, we even written on the constitution that our country is grounded on work. So there is a strong cultural resistance to accept that the livability of a person should be granted anyway. Even now, the technology make work disappear at useful and livable work disappear at an accelerating rate. And the other obstacle might be the lack, at least so far, of a noble endorsement of a reputed person who can convince people who are not convinced themselves by the idea of basic income anyway. I've seen a lot of people, intellectuals, journalists, supporting the idea of basic income in theory, writing articles in favor of it or books in favor of it, but then resisted to endorse this ECI in particular, possibly because they don't know what people is behind. I don't know, but in this sense, speaking in reputed venues like the National Council for Research, like I did a few weeks ago, and today in the Economy of Francesco, is something I totally welcome. Now let me speak a little about our continental network, which is something that maybe Andrea Fumagalli, Alessandro Bianca will talk about later. In order to get more signature and visibility, we have networking with other realities, like the Action on Credit, like the other ECI. Currently, there is one on Action on Climate Emergency, another one run by the Pirate Party, which has the livable income, which is basically basic income in their statutes, a cooperation with a European institution called Humans, and with other platform like WeMove.eu. Well, also there is another big initiative, a big side initiative called the UB for All, which is the extrapolation, the expansion to the European level to an initiative that was already run by a private guy in Germany for some years now, which is basically a raffle that the people can contribute to, that once it reaches a certain threshold, like 9,600 years, can find a basic income from a randomly selected person from a year. This is both a game, something funny for those who participate, and is also a totally serious sociological experiment, if you like, because also it helps examine what happens in the mind of people who are at least temporarily free from the anxiety of not surviving the next week and next month. Okay, these are the last contacts of Klaus and Ronald, which are the two references at the European level. You can see also the social media channel. That is basically it, by the way. If you are happy to, I would like now to project a 3-minute video presentation and then give room to my other two fellow in this venture. Okay?
Yes, go ahead, share the video.
Okay, I just stop share with it. And now let me project this video. Okay.
Today, austerity seems to be the only answer given to remedy the economic crisis in Europe, yet people are getting poorer and poorer. Automation in manufacturing and wealth accumulation by financial institutions are changing our approach to work. More and more is produced with fewer and fewer people. Unemployment rates have skyrocketed and paid work is no longer a right for everyone. The good news is that never before in history have human societies generated so much wealth. But while this wealth is produced by the work of all, past and present, this wealth is unevenly distributed among citizens. We, as European citizens, propose an alternative. It's not a new idea, but now is the time to put it into action. It's called Unconditional Basic Income. Have you heard of it? Not yet? Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment and sickness. There it is. Basic income should be universal, individual, unconditional, and high enough to ensure a dignified existence and participation in society. This new fundamental right for humanity not only would eradicate misery, it is also a way to develop non-market oriented work, such as artists, parents, and volunteers. But it's also an economic measure. A basic income for all means supporting local business. Therefore, it would enable us to fully exercise our citizenship. How do we finance it? Easy. We have several proposals: financial and high-income taxation, a consumption tax on luxury goods and polluting products, and mainly self-financing by simplification of a very long list of current social transfers and associated public services, which have become obsolete. What we propose would be much simpler, equal, and transparent. Everyone gets a basic income without even asking for it. But then, of course, it's up to you to work if you want more money. We as European citizens have now launched an official petition called the European Citizen Initiative to make the European authorities examine our manifesto. So, what's the deal? First of all, we have to surpass a minimum threshold of 7 countries minimum. 15 countries have already joined the campaign and are getting ready to collect signatures. Hopefully, others will join up soon. The European Commission must consider our proposals when we reach the 1 million signatures required. If accepted, studies of the different models and amounts of basic income will begin. We must mobilize by organizing events, creating local groups, and creating a buzz by telling your friends and everyone around you that a new idea is growing in Europe.
Thank you for watching this video. Please visit eci-ubi.eu and sign our initiative.
This looks great. And if tomorrow is Universal Basic Income Day, we can share it since it's dedicated to our village tomorrow because it's the 1st of May. Professor Fumagalli, you want to follow Michele?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Giorgio. And thank you to everyone for inviting me to this panel and to this discussion. I am an economist, teach economics at the University of Pavia, and I live in Milano. And I am interested in the topics of basic income since, I can say, more than 20 years. I would like, if it's possible, to talk about basic income, the reason in support to basic income, how to finance it, and so on. We can use a couple of days, 24 hours, just to, so there are a lot of topics about that. there is a point I would like to stress. I think that can be useful to not to repeat always the same things. Sorry for that, but to try to better the discussion, because I think that nowadays, this is my point. Nowadays, the reason for the existence of a basic income in this economic context, in this accumulation paradigm of contemporary capitalism, are stronger than before, are very much stronger than before, than 30 or 50 years ago. Because I think that basic income should be considered primary income. What is primary income? It is an economical concept. That means that it is an instrument of direct income or primary income distribution, like wages as a remuneration of labor activity, as profit as remuneration of business activity, as rent in the different form of the rent, as remuneration of a property. From an economic point of view, I am an economist and I apologize for that, but so that is my point, my departure point of view, but I am very much interested in sociology and philosophy too. So I'm a strange economist from this point of view. And from an economic point of view, when we talk about income distribution, functional income distribution, not personal income distribution, that means the distribution between aggregate social classes like workers, entrepreneurs, rentiers, etc., etc. We normally, the economists, divide in two parts: a direct income distribution, that is the result of how the GMP, if we, in any case, I have a lot of doubt about to consider GMP a right indicator of the richness of the wealth that is produced by human activity. But in any case, it is the indicator that is normally used by economists. And the GMP is distributed according to the different inputs that who participated to its creation. That is labor, business, etc., etc., etc. And normally this kind of distribution is a result of bargaining according to the strong relationship situation. Sometimes this distribution is a result of an agreement between social parts, otherwise is a result of conflicts and so on. That history is full of a lot of examples about that. Then there is, especially after the crisis of the 30s of the last century, with the New Deal by Roosevelt and the hegemonical role played by Keynesian policies, the new second income distribution that was led by public intervention by the state, affecting indirect income to families through the welfare state system, by implementing fiscal and monetary policies in order to incentive investment activity and to sustain a rate of profit, etc., etc. Normally, in our tradition, all the topics, all the uses related to social security is part of this second type of income distribution. In fact, as Michele underlined before, there is a cultural resistance that is due to the fact that normally basic income and any form of income support is considered an instrument of assistantship. That, of course, because we are civil person, we don't like to see homeless living under the bridges and so on, or people that is unable to work. But so it's a question of it's a civil question, we can see, a social question to give some resources to these people in order they can survive. But in any case, in this perspective, social protection, social security, in any case, is a second step respect to the first one that should provide better condition of life, that is labor activity. Before come labor, when it's not possible to work, to have a job, then there is a social system that is able to provide some resources. This is typical from the result of a certain type of valorization processes, of accumulation processes that was established till the mid-70s in Europe and the capitalist country. This is called the Fordist-Tayloristic paradigm, based on tangible production, large firm organization, with a specific hierarchical organization of society, etc., etc., etc. I don't want to recall all these aspects. All right. In this case, unemployment is with Keynesian public welfare. Unemployment should be fought with subsidies, unemployment subsidies, etc., and so on and so on. Now, in that context, basic income was marginal, we can say. Was more important the distribution of labor time among all the workers in order to reach the target of full employment. I think that nowadays we are in a very different situation, structurally different situation. The Fordist period, the Fordist era, is definitely over. The new forms of accumulation and valorization and wealth creation are completely different. That technological paradigm is completely different from the rigid mechanical paradigm typical of assembly lines of Tayloristic era. Nowadays, all the capacity to create productivity gains and competitiveness are based essentially, I have to cut a lot, based on the exploitation of dynamic scale economies like learning economies, like network economies, based on the use, generation, diffusion of knowledge in a space that is more and more virtual than geographical space. Of course, we face all the process of internationalization of production in the 80s, 90s till now, with a completely changing role, a changing model of organization of big corporation. With the role played today by supply chain, international and subcontractor in supply chain as a new model of internationalization of production. But in any case, virtual space and knowledge are today the key variables able to create wealth. And that leads to a completely change in our way of living, of working, and in a capacity to have relations with other human beings. The frontier of this transformation is represented by what's the so-called platform capitalisms. In platform capitalisms, there is the valorization is based on the fact that life, our personal life, our everyday life is inserted in a valorization cycle, is put to value. With the spread of internet economy in the 90s, in the phase that we can call cognitive capitalisms, our human faculties, learnings, sensuality, capacity of speaking language, sensors, of course, skills, information, education, and so on, were put to value through the labor intermediation. Nowadays, in presence of platform capitalisms, when we use social media platform. We use a platform gathering of manufacturing platforms like web Amazon platform, like Siemens platform, like cloud computing, like big data analysis, like all this kind of stuff. What we do every day by using a simple app on our smartphone is inside a process of a productive process. A process that is able to produce value, but not value in terms of that satisfy our needs or our dreams. In other words, use value, but able to produce exchange value, able to be captured and produce profit for someone that are always in low number, we can say, because the process of concentration is very high in these times. No, so that is the reason in which today the big problem is not if you are productive or not productive. I think that is a false dichotomy, false problem, because we are all productive. Because by the simple way of living, we are inside the production, inside the process of commodification. Our life is commodified. That is something that is quite dangerous, in my opinion. And the dichotomy, the problem, is the difference between who is productive and whose production activity is certified and acknowledged, and hence in a certain way remunerated, and other people whose productive activity is not certified, is not acknowledged, and is unpaid. It's not free, like unpaid. So the question between the dark side of the employment condition is the income condition, is the remuneration condition. That is why I think that if we start with a cultural jump, we can say, we can start to think at basic income as primary income, as an instrument of remuneration. And basic income should be justified by the fact that it is an instrument to remunerate our productive life that is not certified as productive, as wages is a remuneration of labor activities that is certified as productive. And there are some laws, labor laws, social bargaining, individual bargaining in the labor market and so on. So that is the cultural jump that is, I think, that we need to do. And of course, here there is the rising of two big problems. The first one is the problem of the unit of measure. Because if we agree to say that our life is becoming more and more productive, how can we measure this life productivity? Because if you consider the measure of productivity in terms of the number of output in physical terms, then you can use all the physical units of measure that the human capacity created in the history. From meter, liter, ampere, watts, etc., and so on, gigabyte, megabyte, all this kind of measure. But if we are have to define a measure of our life, our capacity of relationship, our experience, our skills, our capacity to solve problems, to interacting, to all the questions linked to the social reproduction of labor force, all the welfare aspects are becoming more and more a regime of production. Now here there is a problem of quantify this activity, this production between brackets. And that is one problem.
Professor, let me interrupt you a second because there was a question.
Yes, so, that is the second question I want to analyze about the finance.
Right, not only the finance, but since there's a cultural change and shift, if it is approved, will people still be willing to work? Because that was one of the problems, like it might be a disincentive to working.
I don't think so, for a simple reason. because I don't believe that that a human being like very much to do nothing, or to sleep 24 hours on an armchair, not to watch TV, because if you watch TV, you are productive, but just to make nothing at all. Today is impossible. It's impossible. Even if you like, you can go to live alone up on a mountains, is to stay completely alone, like in a hermitage. But I think that even in that case, you are in a certain way inside something productive. I think that for me, it's a positive idea to insert in the chart of human rights the right to choose the job and the work they like to do. That is the right to self-determine himself or herself. That is the concept of freedom for me is when you are free to choose and you are not under blackmail of someone or something. And of course, that means that lots of jobs, of hard jobs, of dirty jobs, cannot be, it's difficult to find, to make, and maybe they are necessary. Nowadays, that is the same debate that was present in the beginning of the last century when there was a claim for the reduction of labor time.
Okay, I have to stop you there because
no, just to say that the result is of a technological solution, or you have to pay more these jobs to increase the wages of the job.
Exactly. I'm just interrupting you because you didn't follow our last workshop, which is what we were trying to say. The dirty jobs, right, that we consider that are not paid enough should actually maybe have more value. So the more people will do them, the more they will see the actual value of it. And in fact, the new dichotomy could be that we're also all caretakers and caregivers, right? As we mentioned in our last workshop. One of the other problems that was emerging, which I actually want to hear Alessandra on now, Bianchi, so we can pass her the word since she's young, was that they were worried that by either financing or reducing work time, then young people would end up just working more. It would just be on paper, but you wouldn't really get any advantage from it. So go ahead, Alessandra. It's your turn anyway. Share what you were going to share with us.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I am Alessandra Bianchi. I'm the chair of Unconditional Basic Income Europe. We are a network of volunteers and organizations that aim to promote UBI and to make it a reality and to make it being recognized as a human right. So yeah, we do many different things. We do some petitions, we write policy papers, we do some lobbying here in Brussels. And I very much appreciated what Professor Fumagalli just said. And I'm sorry, I have to make you repeat your question because I quite didn't understand what you meant regarding the time and jobs. So
no, I was just saying, just on the same level, if UBI is a disincentive to work, so that's on one side. So how you feel as a young people voice, since you represent the age range of our participants. And then on the other hand, we were arguing in our last workshop that a reduction in working time might weigh on the shoulders of young people because it would just be on paper where you just work the same, but on paper you're making less money. So we were trying to see where we can find a balance with this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand. Okay, so regarding the disincentive of work, I quite agree with the Professor Fumagalli. I don't think human beings are meant to do nothing. Quite the opposite. And in fact, when you look at all the experiments that already have been done in the across the globe, not only in Europe, but also in the US and in Canada and in Kenya and in India. There have been many what we call pilot projects of some kind of forms of UBI. And all of these, the most recent one was in Norway, and all of these just present the fact that people don't work less. And on the contrary, people, what they do when they have their income taken care of is that they enroll in new trainings, they take time to reconsider their lives, they take time to pause and say, okay, this job, this career is not quite what I want to do, and I want to change. And in fact, they train, and then they become more happy in their new job and their new occupation. So I think UBI is not only a matter of social redistribution of opportunities and money, but it's also a very promising idea in how to better the lives of human beings in general, you know, because right now we're living in a work society. Everything is determined by work, your social status, your way of life, your acceptance or not in the society. I mean, there is so much stigma around people who are not able to find jobs, or not, I mean, where people were unemployed or not able to work. There is so much discrimination. There is so much, you know, life in general in society is determined by work. And what UBI is trying to do is not to take work out of the equation, but just to make it, you know, a kind of, I see this as a flower, you know. Right now, work is the center, and all around you have your social life, your family, your personal interests, etc. And what UBI does is that it gives you the center, so the income, the part that makes you able to survive, and then it puts work as another component of life, another petal at the same level of the rest. And I think that this is profoundly human. And it could be the solution of a more equal society. And as Professor Fumagalli just said, we are in a particular time. This platform economy and the monetization of everything that we do. I mean, I believe it's fairly unfair that all my work that I do when I use my phone, or when I buy something, or when I just breathe, is all of this monetization, all of this wealth that I'm creating with my life just because I'm breathing goes to the 0.01% of people out there. And it doesn't, you know, trickle down as Mr. Biden just said yesterday. And I think UBI is a real alternative, a real new door to a more fair and equal society. So that is for the part of work. Sorry. And as for the second question, redistribution of work time. Well, I never really thought about that, because I thought that precisely when we redistribute time of work, work is limited in, you know, in legal jurisdiction, I would say. So if your contract says that you work 15 hours, then yes, you work 15 hours and you're paid for that. If the remuneration is high enough, as with a basic income, so that it allows you to live a dignified life, so to have a roof, to have food, to have clothes, and to be able to, for example, put your kids to school or something like this, which is fundamental and basic. Well, the rest of your free time, I would say, your time is what you wanted to do with it, you know? So if you want to pursue the activity that you're paid for, while having this time on your hands, you might do it. But I don't think that young people will work more if we have legally less hours to work. I think it's a bit of a contradiction because it's defying the idea, the basic idea of this. But I would have to think about this more.
Right, and you can intervene again. Before I open the floor to Professor Malleson and Nedelsky, I just wanted to ask Giorgia if she can give me for 5 minutes. Do you agree with what Alessandra said? Because I know that you study universal basic income in South Africa in general. So she mentioned Kenya. So I don't know, can you just give me just one spot before we open the discussion?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the
Yeah, Giorgia, by the way, also works for FAO, so she has an idea of other financing options as well.
Yeah, I mean, the work I do for the universal basic income is mainly my academic work. But yeah, I have also some insights from FAO if people are interested, and we can maybe discuss them later. I think I might have just 2 or 3 like quick reactions to what I heard, especially to the last 2 interventions, Professor Fumagalli and Dr. I don't know, Alessandra Bianchi. So my first reaction when Professor Fumagalli was talking, I kind of remembered a book which is called Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, who recently disappeared. And I mean, I'm sure you all know him. And it just
in Venice.
Sorry?
In Venice died David Graeber.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately. And so it just triggered to me this thought, which linked to what Professor Fumagalli was saying on the fulfillment of people's talent on this lifetime, which, I mean, only this reason alone would, for me, be enough for promoting a universal basic income grant. Because I think what people do with their time, it's extremely important, either productive or unproductive, whatever we want to call it. So any measure that would allow any human being to fulfill its vocation, his talent, whatever we want to call it, for me is extremely welcome, and it's the way to go. The second thought that I had was about another book, actually, an article by Guy Standing on precariat and precarious works, precarious jobs, precarious minds. And also, I mean, it also made me think about it, and the fact that there is this, I don't know how to call it, if it's a class or a group or of people who, because of their needs of money and their vulnerability and their precarity, they're actually excluded from a lot of the political and social environment activities, which again, for me, it's a big loss. So, Guy Standing in his book, he says that the precarity of job condition, it actually leads to precarized minds and precarized ways of living. And again, I mean, this for me, it's like, it could be another good reason for promoting a more stable kind of income acquisition, or however we want to call it. And I think, yeah, I mean, of course, when we talk about developing countries, things might be a little bit different. I agree with Alessandra that a lot of experiments have been carried out, not only in Kenya, but also in Namibia, for instance. There was a pilot project in Namibia. In South Africa, which is the country where I'm going to work, there has been discourse about the basic income for the last 20 years, the universal basic income for the last 20 years. And most recently, during and after the COVID crisis, people are starting again discussing on how this could be implemented. So I guess things will get very exciting about that in South Africa. But yeah, I mean, the main concerns of a lot of scholars remains the sustainability and the economic, the funding, basically. So I don't know if
Right.
there's gonna be a discussion.
Thank you. No, I needed a flash real quick, and then we'll get into.
I don't know if I just, I mean, that was just my first reactions to.
Right. No, that's exactly what I needed. So thank you. So I want to open the discussion now and go back, because one of the problems is, again, how do we finance both part-time for all and a universal basic income, and if they could support each other in some way. So I don't know, Professor Malleson, I know what Professor Nedelsky think, and I will give her the word in a second, but do you have any, again, some notes for us, something that you could share that could open a discussion on the topic?
Well, so let me just make a couple quick comments about basic income, and then Jenny can start saying some things about part-time work, and we can circle back to me if people want. So, thank you for, my name's Tom. I'm a professor at King's University College in Canada. Thank you for having me. So I do some academic work on basic income, and I think so let me make just two quick points. The first is that basic income is crucial because it addresses some of the most fundamental problems and crises facing contemporary societies. So one of those is economic insecurity, right, which is prevalent and rising. And basic income is so vital because economic security should be a human right. The ability for people to have their basic needs met should be guaranteed regardless of your working conditions, regardless of having a job or not. That is well known. The other issue that I think is less well appreciated is that basic income, I think, could play a very vital role in helping us resist the rise in right-wing populism. This is a very dangerous phenomenon, right, that we are seeing all around the world. And it is a complicated phenomenon. There are definitely important cultural elements, but there's also an economic element. And that one of the core things is that a major reason that so many so many white men, particularly without a college education, are being drawn to right-wing populist neo-fascist ideas is because of economic insecurity. That people feel helpless and hopeless, they have no prospects. And so until we deal with that fundamental problem, we are going to continue to see the growth of these very scary movements, and basic income can really help with that. Inequality, of course, basic income would be a fundamental way to help with that, provided, of course, that it is financed through taxing of the rich, like it should be. The other thing I want to mention is that basic income is fundamentally useful for gender because it involves recognizing the myriad types of work that happen in our society that are not paid work, right? Particularly recognizing care work and care labor. And so that's a really important aspect of basic income, as well as the fact that it makes it much easier for people to shift to part-time work. Right? If you have a guarantee of an income, it makes it easier to shift into part-time work, which is useful for people to share caregiving responsibilities more equally, particularly if you can get the men to shift into part-time work, because women already do it quite a lot. The last comment I want to make is a bit more of a kind of caveat, which is that although I am very supportive of basic income, it's important to recognize that there are two very different versions of basic income that are offered. Generally speaking, there is a progressive version, which I think we are talking about, but there is also a conservative version. And the conservative version says, let's have a basic income to replace large parts of the welfare state. So we will reduce welfare, we will reduce disability payments, we will reduce all kinds of subsidies to various groups of people, all these complicated bureaucratic systems, and replace with one simple system. And that is a very libertarian discourse, right? Milton Friedman was famously an advocate of basic income, and I think it's very dangerous. So this language of simplifying the welfare state sounds nice, but I think it is very dangerous because it risks actually reducing the amounts of resources that go to poor people. I think it could actually make people's lives much worse. And we do not want a one-size-fits-all system because different people have very different needs in society. So it is not a good solution to just have one chunk of money that goes to everyone. Different people need different things. Disabled people need different things. Women need different things because of childcare responsibilities. Racialized people need different resources. Homeless people need different things, right? So having a simple basic income can help with these groups, but we do not want to fall into the conservative trap of replacing the targeted service systems with a basic income. So I think this is an important point. The kind of basic income that I advocate, and I think we should advocate, is not one that replaces a welfare state. It's one that complements. We want generous welfare services. We want to move in the direction of, Nordic generous social services and add to that a basic income. We do not want to reduce the services, I think, and replace it with a basic income, because I think that has the potential to actually make many poor and working class people's lives actually worse. Thanks.
Agreed. Before I pass the word to Professor Nedelsky, Sara, did you want to make a comment? Because you liked him bringing it up. So I don't know if you have a specific experience on your side as a young people voice to what Tom said.
Thanks, Georgia, and thanks everyone for having me. And sorry for the delay. I'm just coming from our own webinar about the digitalization of life and work. Thanks a lot for this discussion, and to Tom for bringing that up, because it's really the question which many young workers have from the globe, many young Christian workers, exactly because also social security and social welfare, all what is understood by social protection, there's so many countries which do not really have it yet. No, there's so many lacks about healthcare. There's so many lacks about a good traffic system, a public transport system, etc. And there's also this discussion about which was mentioned by some liberal ideas of people saying that we can just give some monetary fee to everyone and this will replace. But actually, we do need this infrastructure, and maybe even if you would have access to quality education, to quality healthcare, and to quality public transport, maybe that's even more important than just the money. Because if you have the money, but you're not able to have this basic human rights fulfilled, then actually this basic income doesn't help. So that's why I'm also always bringing up the question: how can we guarantee that the basic income will not replace the public services? On the other hand, it will strengthen them. And this is not only the question about some liberal ideas, but it's also about how it will be. Because we know that with all the austerity going on the international level and from governments, that it could be such an easy excuse to say, but we are paying everyone the basic income, so then we don't need to invest in the public infrastructure. So how are we going to avoid that?
Yeah, Professor Nedelsky, do you want to take that and just move into your comments?
Well, actually, I have a few other questions, but I just want to follow this up first and then put it as a question to Tom. So first, on this issue of replacing existing social services, the video which I watched earlier this morning and then again here has this picture of this long list of social programs which are going to disappear. Right? Did you all notice that? Bureaucratic, now unnecessary, outmoded. So, unspecified what they have in mind, but I was quite disturbed by that presentation.
Yes,
in light
disturbing.
of this. Yeah. So that's the big presentation of this for the EU. And so then my question for Tom really follows for this. So when we had a detailed conversation about this maybe 4 years ago, about what kind of economic security would work best to support the Part-Time for All project, we sort of agreed to disagree between us. I was sort of on side of basic income, and as I understood it at the time, Tom thought it was more important because it's a political strategic judgment, right? Where are you going to invest your energies? Are you going to invest them in terms of basic income or improving state-funded social services, healthcare, transportation, education, so on? And Tom thought it was overall people's lives, those at the bottom of the income scale, would be more improved by advocating for better social services in the wealthy countries than going for basic income. So now we're 4 or 5 years later, and basic income has exploded on the political scene. So it has a resonance and an acceptability that it just didn't have 5 years ago. So the strategic question of where you put your energies has shifted because of what's happening in the world. But my question back to Tom is, realistically, if we get the money necessary to actually have a livable basic income. So I just say here that 5 years ago, it was pretty widely accepted, I thought, at least in the North American conversations, that if we ever got it, it would come in at welfare levels. That is, barely enough to survive. It would not be a livable income. Nobody thought that a basic income would actually be a livable with dignity income. So if that's what we're actually aiming for, then that's going to take a lot of resources. And is it realistic to think that we can simultaneously have a genuinely livable income and in, say, Canada and the United States, a significant improvement in public funding for transit, healthcare, education, et cetera? So that's my question to Tom, where he is strategically on trying to think about where to invest our political energies.
Yeah, so great question. I mean, I think that the goal is to provide economic security, and the way you do that is going to depend on all kinds of political factors about, is it more likely to get universal public services or basic income, is going to depend on all kinds of like political, social movement factors in that place. I think both are important. I don't feel that one is right and one is wrong in all conditions. My general feeling is that the less developed welfare system you have, the more that should take priority. So in the US today, the welfare system is more important than a basic income, I think. Like when you don't have healthcare, you don't have childcare, those are more important for providing, I think, the basic needs of people than a basic income. As the welfare system develops, Canada, Italy, then I think basic income does become more strategically more important than investing in more public services. But so if we're talking about cases like Canada or like Italy, it's a strategic question, not a deeply moral one. I think we want more economic security. Can you do that through basic income or universal public services? I would want both, sign up, and I do mobilize for both. So I don't think it's an either or question. We should push our political parties to support both of those. One of the interesting advantages of basic income, the last thing I'll say about this is, like, I think one of the advantages of basic income is if we got it, even if it is small, I think it would be hard to get rid of it. And that's asymmetric, right? Because if you have little welfare programs, it is easy to get rid of those. Every time a conservative government comes in, they chop a welfare program. It is probably harder to chop a basic income because it goes to so many people, right? Almost half the population would get it. I mean, everyone gets it, most people pay it back, but at the end of the day, almost 50% of the population would get it. So it becomes like pensions. So many people get these services that is so much harder. There's such a bigger block of people supporting it. It's much harder to chop it away, right? So that's why we've seen in North America, our pension rates have not really dropped, right? Because so many people get it, you cannot take it away from people. Whereas that is not true for welfare, right? For our homeless populations, welfare is taken away every 4 years. So I think that to me it does kind of change the strategic calculus a little bit, that even if we could get a small basic income in the next 5 or 10 years, and then try to ramp it up slowly. I think there's a strategic usefulness in that, because I think once people start getting anything, even if it's a couple $100 a year, they will be resistant to that. There'll be so many people seeing some benefit that you will have a political mass that will be very resistant to having that taken away again.
Yeah, I know Domenico had, yeah, go ahead, Professor.
But if somebody wanted to respond directly to Tom, that's fine. I'll come back in.
No, I just wanted to give a chance to Michele to say something about the video, since you both found it disturbing.
Okay, well then, I'll
just go ahead, and then he can intervene later.
Okay, so first, just a quick follow-up to Tom. I have the impression when I talk to friends from the Netherlands that the number of people who would personally know somebody whose lives have been significantly improved through basic income is much greater than the number of people who will personally know somebody who has benefited from good welfare payments, right? The whole population. You'll have a kid who's got mental health problems, or everybody will know somebody who's benefited. And that's part of why it will make it harder to cut back on basic income than on welfare, because that remains this segmented group of people who get the benefits from it. Another thing that I like about basic income is I think it probably that the estimates in the arguments in Canada today are that it could eliminate 50% of the poverty almost immediately. And so poverty is such a huge cost to everyone that's a huge reason. But it would also change, we touched on this briefly before, not just what to do about bad jobs, but about good jobs that are badly paid, which is almost all the care jobs, right? Those are not intrinsically bad jobs, but they're treated as low status, and so they're badly paid. And if you had, especially anything approaching a livable income, that would shift what happens to both bad jobs and bad paying jobs. But so now I want to raise two questions. One is on the financing issue. So 7 or so years ago, I was at the BIEN, which is Basic Income Earth Network conference in Montreal. And I was horrified that the opening presentation was about how we could fund it through an extractive industry of timber and mining and, I raised my hand in the question period and said, wait, I thought this was, earth income here. And I would say about a third of the people in the room applauded, and others were, anyway, this is a big, big question, right? There are many countries, including Canada, which rely on extractive industry. And we really cannot be looking to that to fund basic income. So that's one point. The other point that I wanted to mention, and this we've kind of touched on this indirectly in thinking about, the libertarian version of basic income. So it's not just the structure of it in terms of eliminating welfare, but the arguments. So, again, being raised as an American originally, of course, I believe in autonomy and self-determination, but I get very nervous when I hear freedom to choose. That is what really matters, and of course, for Van Parijs, it was what matters. He is what matters. He's a libertarian, and that's the root energy behind basic income. Is everybody is free to choose what they want to do. If surfers, can surf. Now, you could hear, any of you who know anything about the Part-Time for All project, you can hear the tension, because that relies on a norm, not law, but norm, that everybody has a responsibility to participate in care. Everybody who is able contributes to care. Now that's, and in fact, sometimes when people get all anxious about, oh, but that's coercive, we can't allow that. I say, what about the fundamental coercion of all the societies we know, that you have to work to live? So basic income is intended to challenge that coercion that is embedded in all of our societies. And I'm in favor of that, because it's that coercion which has allowed the bad jobs and the badly paid jobs. But we have to be very careful about invoking this language of, oh, well, self-determination, the right to choose, that's our highest value, because there are also norms of collective responsibility. And they take the form, to use the old-fashioned language, of both reproductive labor and productive labor, right? And in all the many ways that people have referred to here, we contribute in many, many different ways, not just what is currently recognized as paid work. So I just want to put that on the table, that choosing is important, but if we're not careful about our language, we slide into a libertarian mode of thought, which would threaten the kind of normative grounds of part-time for all.
Yeah, also, I liked Alessandra's metaphor of the flower. But so I like the fact that the petal could be, you know, so work is central and then everything else kind of revolves around it, and it could be one. But then at the same time, for me, universal basic income was more kind of like putting a garden, you know, to all these flowers. So then I don't know if it would solve, I don't know, this is just following the metaphor, but it kind of gives structure to everything that we're trying to build. But then I don't know if Victor actually wants to say something, because he was saying, does it fit in with the Francesco purpose? So I don't know if you want to say something about that so we can add to this conversation.
According to Pope Francis, he says here about handout or dole outs, that these are not just enough. Maybe temporarily we can have it. But from the church point of view, Pope Francis wants really to change the economic system, wherein the system today, which is really rooted from sin, from the sin of Adam and Eve. And Pope Francis is bringing us towards the renewal of the church. And wherein we, in the church, would like to apply the economy of the Garden of Eden, wherein if you have seen what we have started in 2015, wherein we really want to bring the economy of the Garden of Eden, wherein we have to regenerate this world today, and then we grow our own food, because we need light, we need water, and we need air. So from the economic point of view today, we have to monetize everything, and we have the last area of survival, wherein we have the Amazon, and we want also to monetize the Amazon. And if they do that, what will happen to the world of today? What happened to the air we breathe? There's no more trees. So we bring out towards the economy of the Garden of Eden and the Eden within us. The Eden within us. We're made of humus. As the soil has microbes, we also have some microbes. We need air, water, we need light. So that's why we have to grow our own food. And then, as the Bible says, teach a man to fish. And as the Chinese proverb says, give man a fish and he will eat for a day. Teach him how to fish and he will eat for the rest of his life. So,
Agreed. We definitely need to add an integral ecology approach. Yeah, Professor Fumagalli, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Just because, of course, there is a different points of view according if you are inside the European debate or inside the North American debate, because even the use of the same words maybe change a little bit from one continent to another. Of course, I completely, I know perfectly that about basic income, there is a lot of different positions, theoretical positions coming from the right side to the extreme left side. Of course, there is the libertarian hypothesis about basic income, especially linked to talk about the libertarian thoughts. That's is not here the case, but there is a more free market supporters, according to the theory of von Hayek and von Mises, whose Milton Friedman was the most relevant representative, that thinks basic income in terms of negative income tax just to avoid or to reduce the role played by the state at minimum level. And that is a political perspective, a right-wing perspective, in my opinion. Personally, I completely disagree. Before I said that for me it is important to avoid any form of coercion or blackmailability, especially about the diffusion, the huge diffusion of precarity jobs, especially in my country, but even in Europe or in other parts of the world too. I think that the possibility to say no to a labor offer, it's one of the points that better characterize and justify the existence of a basic income. Because that is an idea to open the space of possibility of human beings. I think that it's something that Pope Francesco would like to reach, no? To make the possibility for the people to produce for use values and not only for exchange values. No? An anthropogenetic model of human beings for human beings. And this goal, this final goal, is possible only if everyone can use their talents, their experience, their curiosity in trying to do what he or she will prefer. That is what I intend, the right to choose. The right to choose my life. The concept of self-determination is, in Europe, for instance, is a derivation of feminist movement. The women's self-determination is something that has to do with all the blue-collar struggles in the 60s and the 70s, the student movements in those years. Just to say, I have, my life is mine. That doesn't mean to be individualistic, like a certain libertarian approach, because I am a member of a community in a reciprocal solidarity relationships, and since we are all different from one each other, every specificity should be complemented to other specificity. And that is what I think, that basic income is a powerful tool in order to obtain this goal. But of course, it's not only the only one, because here there is another cultural jump that we need to do, that we need to be heterogeneous in the way of thinking, to be flexible in the way of thinking, without transforming us in precarious, we can say. To be flexible means that we have to use basic income in order to give a sort of monetary base, just to say no to some something that we don't like to do. And then, of course, there is all the solidarity coming from welfare provision, a public health system that is able to work and not to have the bad result as the pandemic situation showed, to have an educational system fair and not hierarchical according to the class structures, and so on and so on. Transport, sociality, the right to the connectivity to internet, the right to culture, to information, and so on and so on. These are all, it is a packet of things that should march all together. There is no, that is one is more important than other. It's something that we have to think in a global perspective. I think that poses the big question is, which kind of welfare system do we have in mind that is compatible with the new forms of exploitation, of valorization, and extraction of richness in favor of few against the means. Then I have to say to Jennifer that I remember perfectly what you said about the Montreal Conference of BN because I was present there. And that is the idea is actually that there are some research that thinks that basic income can be financed, especially maybe in the north of the planet, by exploiting and making land grabbing to the south. That is explain exactly the heterogeneity of position about basic income. I think that we should clarify, and I think that each the European initiative, give a specific definition of basic income in terms of unconditionality, and without doing any kind of references to the dismantling of welfare provision. That is quite important too. Then how can we avoid the possibility that maybe that when basic income will be implemented, then there is a reduction of welfare provision? That is a political struggle, I think. There is nobody can assure us that will not happen. That is our responsibility in order not to, that this kind of solution will not happen. And that is the clarification of the proposal and rigorosity and the seriousness of this proposal.
Michele, do you want to add to what Professor Fumagalli said?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to add a few more things about the previous topics. Now, a typical question, a trite question emerged, would people work less or more with it? Well, many people now might not be aware of it today, but the most unfettered capitalism, I mean, the United States one, expressed a president who was this far from introducing a policy, a basic income measure, no less than like 30 or 40 years ago, in the 70s. This is not very well known outside of the people who are passionate on the topic. And not far from there, in southern Canada, precisely in the region of Manitoba, there was a small town called Dauphin, where a panel of sociologists tried to implement the first town-wide basic income experiment, basic income pilot. It was called the Mincome, which was a basic income, and everyone would receive it unconditionally. All the people in the study, for years, it lasted 4 years before being killed in a political quarrel, all the participants in the study work more. But young mothers who stay home with the baby and struggling students who completed the school and in most cases possibly even went to college. Now, this might be a single result. No, local experiments of basic income have repeated over the decades. In this period, they're also accelerating, and these results prove to be robust, which, if you want to explain the paradox of Götz Werner, a German billionaire entrepreneur who is in favor of basic income, who said, we've been told all life that you have to work to get money. It's actually the other way around. If you get the money, then you are in a position to do the good work, okay? So first of all, but also, what does this tell us? This tells us of a fundamental misunderstanding, an original sin, if you want to stay in the Francesco team, that we have made for decades. We have conditioned the access to things with money. The withdrawal of money to work, and then we have identified work with labor. We have been talking about shortly about the bullshit jobs, which was an enlightening book also for me. Basic income would be a cure for bullshit jobs because it would help people getting rid of pointless work, of laborless work. It would also unify on the opposite activities like studies and parenting. We are laborless work, but they are true, genuine work worth doing. So this on the side of people working less. And then there is another anecdote, which I'm always happy to share with people in debates like this. In a book that came out, that hit the shelves a few years ago, called The Scarcity, Why Little Matters Much. It was written by a couple of psychologists called Eldar Shafir and Subrai Mullainathan, who made a very simple test on the sugarcane farmers in India. Now, sugarcane is a plant that you only harvest once a year. So sugarcane farmers receive most of their disposable income in a single transfer over a year. So they are relatively rich shortly after, and they are relatively poor, maybe absolutely poor, shortly before. What did this couple of psychologists did? They simply ran a battery test, the same IQ test, shortly after the payment, shortly before the payment, 1 month, and shortly after the payment, 1 month after. The comparison of the result shocks them. When they were rich after the transfer, they score like 14 points of IQ more. They were 14 points of IQ smarter. And 14 points of IQ smarter is a gap you typically pay in conditions like 1 full night without sleeping or the chronic alcoholism. Now imagine such a different individual person scaled to millions and billions of people. That would change, and if you do so, then the question does not become how many people will sleep on the couch forever, which they anyway want. The question becomes, what wealth of collective intelligence tapping we are accepting to sacrifice? That might change entirely the perspective. Aside of that, I have one note about the sources of funding. One might ask how we are planning to fund this European Citizens Initiative. I narrow my perspective on that. We have asked in Europe to have this income funded mostly by a tax on high fortunes and on measures like the Tobin tax on financial translation and carbon tax on the most pollutant companies. This was in the first draft of our proposal. This first draft was rejected precisely because of this proposal, not because the European Commission likes to pollute, of course, but because you are not allowed, the way the instrument of the ECI is designed, we are not allowed to propose economic measures. This is exclusive competence of the European Commission. We only have to propose the social suggestion. So we completely cut away the economic technical part and focus on the social insecurity. But anyway, if you ask me, most of us would be happy to see this funding this way. That's it.
Thank you. Can I ask something? I mean, because, I really thank you everyone, because this debate has been really engaging, and I really was listening to all of you with a lot of interest. I have a few questions and comments I would like to make, because well, first of all, about pilots, initiatives, experiments. So I am also an experimental economist. So I also do myself some, experiments, not about UBI, but on other topics. And so, I mean, I searched a little bit in the last months about some experiments about UBI, and I came across a review that maybe you are aware of, from the annual review of economics of 2 years ago, in which their findings, their aggregate findings, was a little bit, I would say, at least inconclusive, with as opposed as you were saying, in the sense that some of these pilots and experiments were somewhat working, some other were not. In particular, the objection that I found, looking at these works, was that, for example, some experiments in the United States found that a UBI would direct much larger shares to transfer to childless, non-elderly, non-disabled households than existing programs, and much more to middle income rather than poor households. I'm just reading from the excerpts of this. So this is an example, okay? So, and this is my first question. So to say that a UBI targeting everyone in some way could be actually diverting some in relative terms, some resources to people that would need more, to people that would need less under current welfare provisions. And this is just the first comment or question I would like to ask you, if you maybe more about that. The second question is, okay, of course, I mean, I totally agree with you that UBI and other welfare provisions must be seen as complementary. My point is really practical. So how could really think realistically that this is something we can afford? Because I have seen some estimates, okay, and all the estimates I found based on the US, on Europe, European Union, I mean, are really huge in terms of the total amount that would be spent. For example, the example I found about the United States was estimating that a UBI to a decent level in the United States would actually absorb all the federal budget of the United States. So it means that you could not afford to have a UBI and current welfare provisions just because you are finishing off all the money. So in order to have both, you should increase taxation. But then a lot of other problems could raise. For example, you could be worried that increasing the tax rate too much to finance all of these provisions, maybe I don't know, maybe scare some of these large business that could be the major sources for this income, and just have them fluing away in some some places where tax havens or something like that. So you would lose also potential income for also other provisions. So these are just random. Yeah. So to Jennifer, yeah, it was. I can find you the source, but it was in the annual review of economics 2019. So Hoynes and Rothstein, but I can send you the reference. I don't. Maybe it was the social service welfare budget, so not the whole budget, but still, it was a huge, really huge amount in terms of some $100 billion. So a really huge bill in terms of the money spent for this provision. So and another estimates, for example, for the European Union was something like, I think, 3 trillion euros to implement this a UBI for 250 more or less 100 people. So that would be the people eligible under the scheme that was in this paper. So this is I'm honest, my most important concern. So how is it really possible to think we can afford to implement such a huge provision without also reducing other welfare expenditure? Not because we think it is fair to do that, but simply because that would be the political debate. So if resources are limited, are scarce, and if we need to decide how to spend them, I mean, it's really a huge thing to think that we're able to spend all that money without leaving out anything. And so this is my first question. I don't know who can try to answer. And the second, that it is about something that actually I found interesting. Actually, we say about something that Professor Fumagalli told about, the commodification of the current economic model. And so in some way, the basic income could be seen as a reward, as a wage, for this unpaid commodified work that everyone is doing. I would like just to have some clarification about that, some example, because I can understand this in terms of, I don't know, using Facebook or Instagram or other social media platforms, but I don't really get how this can be, the way in other contexts. So to justify UBI in this perspective, as a different cultural perspective. So just as a clarification. And finally, a small thing about the video, just because you already told something that I agree on the video, but just as another thing that maybe it is just a suggestion of a potential update of the video, because at a certain point you mentioned austerity as the main recipe for Europe. That was probably true a few years ago, but nowadays in the post-pandemic world, we are facing the hugest amount of money spent for social welfare, infrastructure spending in all the European Union. So probably the referral to austerity today is no more something really salient in our political debate, because we are living now, I mean, this is my perspective, my personal perspective, a total different story that than the one we were living just 3-4 years ago. But that's enough. Thank you for all your contributions.
Tom, can you try and give an answer to this?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at the cost question. Yeah, so thank you, Domenico. You're right. The cost is a big issue, and I think we need to not try to avoid it and be like, recognize, yes, basic income, if it's meaningful, is expensive. For sure. So there are lots of good estimates out there. I think the range that economists are talking about is usually between 2.5 to maybe 6% of GDP for the more generous ones, right? Obviously, the more generous, the better, and the more expensive, right? So that is expensive. We shouldn't deny it, but I really don't think that kind of number, take 4 or 5% of GDP, is impossible. Right. So look, the United States at the moment, their total tax revenue is about 27 to 30% of GDP. Sweden, Nordic countries are closer to 45-50%. So there's a gap already of 15-20% GDP. So the idea that the US couldn't go up by 5%, I don't think there's any reason for that. And then there's the broader question of what are our constraints? Why is it impossible for countries to increase their tax revenue by 3, 4, 5% GDP, given the brutal inequality of wealth, right? So in the US, the top 1% control 20% of annual income. 40% of the country's wealth is in the top 1%, right? To me, there's no moral or efficiency argument for that. We should have higher wealth taxes. We should have 70% marginal income taxes, right? Like has happened many times over the last 100 years. And there may be worries about, yes, rich people trying to hide their money to tax revenues, to tax havens. But we also have lots of good evidence of how we prevent that. We can clamp down on tax havens. We can have more enforcement. We can have more audits, all kinds of things. So to me, these are not insurmountable problems. Yes, it will cost some money, but I think the bigger point is we should, as progressives, embrace that. Yes, that is the whole point. We want to redistribute the money. So yes, basic income will cost a lot, and that's good, and we are going to redistribute it. The rich do not deserve it. The society does. We are going to raise our income taxes to pay for it. And in that kind of range that we are talking about is a lot. We're probably not going to get to it instantly, but I really don't think that kind of amount of GDP of increase is super utopian. I hope in the next 10, 20 years, all Western countries increase their total tax take by by much more than that. So I don't think that 3-4% GDP increase to pay for basic income is impossible to comprehend in the next decade or two. Right, thank you, Penny. Yeah, so the PBO in Canada estimated it'll be 4%, the cost of the basic income in Canada, and that's total without accounting for savings. So right, so there will be savings because some of the programs are just duplicated. So probably a more realistic estimate is probably closer to 2.5-3%. That's the Canadian estimate for what would have happened if they had taken the Ontario pilot project and expanded it across the country.
Yeah, my only other doubts were what other financing measures could we consider if we were going to consider part-time for all? I don't know if Professor Nedelsky has any other inputs that we could consider, because I agree on, I mean, in Europe, we have a good welfare state. So for sure, it would have to be integrative. But I'm just wondering what other things in general, even as Economy of Francesco, to look into for our research, what other things we could actually consider. I know Georgia was mentioning that FAO does grants. So I wonder if you guys have any other inputs. So as for our next workshop, what we should be looking into.
So first, I'm actually going to pass this over to Tom, but we're not at all talking about wages for housework or wages for care work. So there is no financing to be had here. This is an increase in unpaid care work. So everybody contributes that. The economic issue is if we reduce the work hours to a maximum of 30 hours, is this going to pose a problem to the economy? And Tom has the answer to this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Sarah, that the tax issue is fundamental. It's complicated. There's not a simple answer. I think the big picture answer is for sources of revenue. So income tax is going to be the major source of income for most countries because it is the major source. But for kind of looking forward, the kind of innovative ways I think to think about tax, there are two sources, right? One is carbon tax, because we want to tax the bads, right, that lead to ecological devastation. And the other is a wealth tax. So there are a number of European countries that have wealth taxes. None of them work super well, but I think that the evidence shows that they can work well. And as the Western world has become more and more unequal, the majority of that inequality is actually inequality of wealth, even more so than inequality of income. And so that is like a fundamental problem in our society. So to me, income tax is going to be the central way to pay for these things. But I think the two innovative, important things to be thinking about as we go forward is taxing carbon or environmental bads more generally, and taxing wealth. So those are we have less empirical experience with those two, but I think those are going to be crucial ingredients for a kind of progressive package going forward.
So can I just say one more word on this? So the idea of part-time for all, so everybody contributes unpaid care, everybody limits their paid work to 30 hours. No state financing is required for either of those things. The background issue that Tom was basically responding to, both in terms of basic income, is the question that the whole system will not work well without basic financial security. So that's the foundation. There has to be economic security. So then the question is, well, how do you provide it? And there are different ways of doing that. So if basic income is your primary mechanism for ensuring the economic security that will make part-time for all really feasible, then we have to figure out how to finance basic income. If you're going to rely on social services, Tom made an argument about why that would be the path in the US, then you answered that question. But it's just important to distinguish between saying that we can't imagine this system working well unless the whole population is economically secure. And how are you going to provide that? The actual innovation of reducing work hours, that poses some people think that poses its own economic problem, right? Because if you have a growth-based model of the only way capitalism will work, will the reduction in work hours interfere with the basic economic system? So, and Tom has a different kind of answer to that. So that's a somewhat different question than how are you going to finance the basic economic security?
Do you want to add one last word on that, Tom? If not, we can close on this and then decide what next steps we're going to take.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Professor Nedelsky makes a good point. We need to give it the correct economic security and need to decide what we want to abide by. We're also trying to do some pilots because I think that part of this can be financed by companies themselves. Part of the part-time work. I know there's examples here. They've been trying to reduce the working hours. The only problem is it's great groups that are able to do that. Like here in particular would be Luxottica, or our partner G Group is trying to look into some options, but it wouldn't be very feasible for all the like small business and things that we have. So we need to consider that. So that'll be our next workshop with pilots and new ideas. Go ahead, Professor.
So coming out of our last workshop, you know, there was a little bit of a debate between me and one of the other participants about whether high-level managerial positions are compatible with part-time work. And this is a big issue, and a lot of people who are actually managers insist that it's impossible. Right? To be a manager is to be the one person overseeing everything. This cannot be done on a part-time basis. But as I pointed out at the time, there are thousands of lawyers who will tell you that part-time work is impossible in the legal system. And this is just crazy. I mean, this is something I actually know a little bit about, whereas I don't know much about management. So the reason I mentioned this is I think we're not going to really try to do it in this book, but this is something that we need more research on. Both in terms of pilots and other study, we need to make a case that it just cannot be impossible for management. And I actually think the Netherlands are likely to be the best place to look for this because they have the most sophisticated form of high-level part-time work. So I'm just putting that out to everybody, to whatever resources you do know or projects you might undertake. That would be a really important contribution.
Yeah, I also feel that that kind of fits in with the cultural change, because I kind of felt that he felt, I mean, now he's not here and I talk to him all the time and I work with him, but like, I think he felt kind of threatened, you know, people are like, what? You know, the company will not stand without me if I work 1 hour less. So that's a big problem where we have to make people understand where, yes, it will. This doesn't mean your contribution isn't super valuable or important. Yeah, actually, Felipe has close, Felipe, give us the last, because I know you're trying a pilot with Economy of Communion.
No, we are preparing. In any case, I just would like to make a question to Professor Nedelsky, very practical. So if I understood well, you told us that you and Tom are very busy to close the book, but after that, you are happy to engage in a cooperation, namely trying to test, to make some pilots. Do you have any provision in terms of timings? Just because I would like to understand if we could engage at a certain way. So that's my question.
So I think we will probably send the book to the publisher in a week or so.
Okay.
So then, so we're basically done. Some very last revisions on a very small piece, and then they'll send it out to review, and we'll then probably have some final edits. But so I'm actually at this stage of trying to figure out what I want to do next. You know, there are various projects, but pilot projects are high on my list.
Okay.
And I'd like business school people too to cooperate. Anyway.
Absolutely. So that's the idea. So we are trying to engage some other one business school in Lisbon and also perhaps someone else in Europe. So we let you know, and perhaps we touch base also with Georgia to let you know what steps are we doing and see if we can cooperate. Okay, so that's basically what I have to say today.
Definitely, we want to have a practical. We're doing some practical research, empirical. So we'll see what comes out of that, and then hopefully that'll match with the book and get some momentum from there. Okay, I think we're good. I want to thank everybody. This was really interesting. I'm really excited about how the workshops work this year. So thank you. And
thank you to you. Thank you to everyone.
The next one in June.
Likewise, thanks to everyone.
Very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Same here. Thank you very much.